Imogen Bassett tōku ingoa, ko Kathryn Ovenden tōku poamahi. So thank you for having us here today. My name is Imogen Bassett. I'm the Biosecurity Principal Advisor at Auckland Council. Thank you to the people who've organised this, really appreciate it. So this is, I confess that you're our guinea pigs. This is a bit of a pilot, and so at the end there will be opportunities for questions to us, but also we have some questions for you. So we're really looking to roll out some training, some upskilling for community who want to talk about pet ownership, and so hoping to make available to you the resources and expertise that we have access to in our jobs in council, and so we'd like to do this to other groups and other fora, and so you're the first people we've done it for, so we're really interested in your feedback about what works, what doesn't work, what more, if you're left with questions unanswered, we're really happy to hear them, and if we run out of time today, please feel free to get in touch and follow up. So, by way of introduction of ourselves, so also I've been a companion to many feline family members in my time. At the moment, I don't. I have a rat. Well, actually, 3 rats. Because about 15 years ago, I realised I was ragingly allergic to cats and prescient, possibly, from my job. And so I felt like I was constantly living with a cold all the time, and now I don't because I don't live with cats. But notwithstanding that, actually, they're my pet of choice. I love them, and so absolutely empathise with the value that they bring in a lot of families, a lot of households. I have a PhD in invasion ecology, so like most, I assume all of you here today, I love the natural environment more broadly than just pets. And so Kathryn's outdone me on the photos. I ran out of time to get a photo of, say, for instance, the week that I spent in the Galapagos Islands about 3 years ago, but truly that was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, and really brought home to me what we could have in this land of seabirds if we didn't have exotic predators here. But I do like to get out into the outdoors when I can. And Kathryn?
Yes, likewise, I have a family cat. It does not live in my current household. It's my partner's household, but it's still very much my cat. I think it was my cat. And yes, I've got a picture there of some lutung, which are West Java langurs. I was very privileged to be able to do some work in Indonesia, part of my master's work. And a little bit about stuff I like to do outside of the office. I really like going hiking. So I'm trying to tick off all of the great walks. I've got Hippie there, and just before lockdown, I just did the Tongariro Northern Circuit in glorious weather, so it's a delight.
And we should say, in Kathryn's professional capacity, she's here as one of our resident social scientists. And so to the point that Mary was making before about these issues being people issues, I've become very aware that I got into conservation as a natural sciences person, but a lot of the issues that we face actually are around people. It's not a cat problem, it's a people problem, right? And so I'm very privileged to have Kathryn here with me today because we're really reliant on people like her who've got that understanding of how people work. So why are we here today as council staff? Well, it's because council has a role in the cat management system. So in our regional council function, we have a statutory responsibility for biodiversity protection, and as we know, cats are just one of the many pressures that face our Indigenous biodiversity. We do also have some role around cat management in a nuisance function through our bylaws function, but that's a different part of council to what we work in, and so our mandate and our jobs is really around that biodiversity protection. Historically, council's methods of that biodiversity protection part of our cat management has typically been around cat trapping, so a range of both lethal and live capture trapping for cats. But we've really become increasingly aware over the last few years that actually that's kind of like the fence, the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and I think there will always be a need for that in some situations, but we really also need to expand that approach out to have more of the fence at the top of the cliff and have some of those more positive, proactive conversations as well. And so there are a range of cats of different categories, right? And so under the Companion Cats Code of Welfare, they recognise 3 discrete categories of cats. So you've got your feral cats, your stray cats, and your companion cats. And essentially, we've sort of paraphrased the definition here, but really they are differentiated by the extent to which the cats have interaction with humans. It's really what it boils down to. And so that, although there are 3 discrete categories, to my mind, really it's a continuum, right? It's a continuum of cats' behaviour and it's a continuum of humans' behaviour as well. So our focus at the moment, although as I say, council's got a role across that whole continuum, but where we're thinking about today in terms of responsible pet ownership is really down the bottom of that continuum in the kind of companion cat side of things. Although noting that some of these responsible pet ownership behaviours, some people employ them with animals that are really maybe more into that stray kind of part of the continuum as well, and there can be a role for that as being helpful too. So why should we be interested in responsible pet ownerships for wildlife protection? Well, we know that cats globally have been responsible for around, or contributed to around 14% of all bird, mammal and reptile extinctions globally. Around 8% of endangered species in those groups are still at risk from cat predation, and that's true in Aotearoa as well. So we have many of our really threatened species are very vulnerable to cat predation. And a lot of people say, yeah, but it's not my domestic cat. That, you know, they're at home, they're being fed, they don't need to hunt. And I hear this a lot too. It's not my cat. My cat doesn't catch birds and things. There's an amazing study done in Australia, and I imagine there's similar stats in Aotearoa as well. So earlier this year, that showed that although the per capita catch rate of domestic cats is only 25% of what feral cats are. So every one domestic cat is only eating a quarter of the number of birds or reptiles that one feral cat is. But when you think about it, we collectively own so many more cats in a small area, and because we're able to keep them in that high density because we're providing other food sources. So actually the overall predation rate in the same amount of space is 28 to 52 times higher from domestic cats than it is from feral cats per area. So they actually collectively have a massive biodiversity impact. When we let our cats out to roam, we also put them at risk as well. So studies that have GPS cats show them crossing roads, coming into contact with all sorts of dangerous substances and that sort of thing as well. So it's not just for the impact that they have on other creatures that we might want to keep them at home, but also because actually it keeps them safer as well. And also the conflict with their neighbours thing. So we get at council, we get a lot of people complaining about their neighbour's cat, and it might not be at a scale of nuisance that triggers any kind of actual nuisance compliance under bylaws, but clearly it's enough to cause some kind of neighbourly friction there. So we've prioritised in our work program 3 particular responsible pet ownership behaviours that we really want to promote. One of them is desexing, another microchipping, and then containment. And for containment, we're thinking about on the property, not necessarily inside your house, but on your property. And these days there are an increasing number of products that can enable you to fence property for a cat in the same way that you fence a property for a dog. Now you think about, in my lifetime, we've had a social norm change from dogs just do whatever, go wherever, to we have an expectation that actually a responsible dog owner has their section fenced for their dog. It's a part of what you do when you're looking for a house when you own a dog. So the same is possible for cats. We're just not really kind of cued into that yet. And so what do we know about people who already have a cat in Tāmaki Makaurau? Well, 1 in 3 Aucklanders have a cat, and nationally we know that 44% of households have a cat. On average, actually, they have 1.5 cats. And so from the work that we've done, the research that we've done, it seems like roughly the rates of cat ownership are pretty similar in priority places, so places like this where there's proximity to Indigenous biodiversity compared to your sort of really heart of urban Auckland kind of thing. We do know though that a cat owner is more likely to be Māori or Pākehā. They're more likely to own a home with a mortgage, and they're more likely to be born here in Aotearoa. And also, although from that Auckland study, no differences in terms of urban and rural and stuff, but at a national level there are some other trends that we might infer possibly as well. So why do people have a cat? By far and away the most common thing is companionship. So we know that people, as Michelle's just articulated, people love their cats as family members. So we have to really remember that when we're having any kind of conversation about this. This is a deeply held emotional issue, and you're not going to get anywhere by negating that, are you? And we also know that cat owners are considerably less likely than non-cat owners to think that cats have an impact on wildlife. What are they already doing in terms of responsible pet ownership behaviours? So this, I guess the key take-homes from the slide are two things. So one is that there's a great range in terms of uptake of these types of behaviours. So something like desexing is very, very normative. Almost all cat owners do it. Although, actually, we are a little bit laggard compared to the rest of the country. So in national surveys, Auckland's desexing actually comes out slightly higher than this, but is the lowest of all the main centres. So we've got some work to do in Auckland. But basically, desexing is quite normative. Down to your kind of birds be safe, the ruffled collars, which I've got some examples of up here that you can DIY and stuff. Birds see them, get scared, don't manage to gap it out of the way before the cats get to them. That kind of behaviour, much more very few people are aware of them doing them at the moment. So there's a range of uptake of behaviours already. Very few people keep their cats indoors 24/7 as well. There's also a difference in terms of who's doing these behaviours. So not all cat owners are uptaking these behaviours at the same rate. So we know, for instance, that Pākehā may be more likely to have their cat desexed. Māori may be less likely to be employing these behaviours. And so we've got some work to do probably to unpack some of these details of what are the drivers for these differences. Certainly we know that cost is the number one cited barrier to desexing, and so is this a socio-economic issue where people simply they're not desexing their cats because they don't have the means to do so. So there's a lot of value in exploring some of these things and thinking about what are the drivers to what's going on. And so there's also, as part of that thinking about who you're talking about, there's this different, over time potentially, or across these different behaviours, we need to be thinking about, are we talking to the tail end? We've got practically everybody on board with this and we've just got a small number of people that really we need to get over the line, or is there something that's kind of, and so that's sort of your desexing scenario, or is there something like microchipping where this is increasing rapidly and so it's becoming much more normative? You've got a large number in the middle there who are potentially shiftable, or in the sort of the ruffled collar, birds be safe collar, you're very much down at the what is it called here, at the innovators end of the spectrum. So you're moving, maybe people like yourselves who are particularly motivated on this issue are going to get there first, and then we will start looking at bringing more people along with us. And so before I hand over to Kathryn, my last slide from me is just to talk about where we are prioritising our action. So we have a finite amount of resource to put towards this, of course, and so Council's program, you will see us rolling this out, prioritised very much to the places where we have threatened species that are most acutely at risk from cat predation. So that's our first priority, which is on this left-hand side, and so really these places that are red or circled, so you can see quite a few in your area that are a priority for that. But in this middle, or to the right-hand side, sorry, to that, you can see so the different kinds of blues, one's birds and one's reptiles, but basically these are where threatened species are living that are vulnerable to cat predation. And so clearly large areas in Auckland have got species that are at risk for cats. And of course, there's not just the places where there are threatened species already, but actually also the places where there are cats, and you might have aspirations to bring threatened species back. For instance, if you're doing large-scale tracking programs like we've heard from Mary earlier. And so what's the impact of our cat management on what the likelihood of success is of bringing those threatened species back. So there's a range of places that you as community may wish to be having these conversations beyond the scope of where our targeted interventions are. Right, so Kathryn, I'll hand over to you.
So as Imogen's been saying, we've got a couple of target behaviours that we're interested in tackling first. So I'm going to talk a bit about what do we mean by this term behaviour change. I can have a quick, has anyone heard this before, this term? Couple, or about half, maybe more than half? Cool. So what is behaviour change? It's got a couple of different definitions thrown around. So when I'm talking about behaviour change, by behaviour I mean the things that people do, not what they think or what they say, but the actual actions that they take. And so behaviour change describes the modification of the things that people are doing, and we can do this through the implementation of different interventions. And so interventions can take a range of different forms, and they're the tools that influence someone's behaviour. They can be services, products, marketing, architecture, legislation, the behaviour we observe other people doing. It can be anything pretty much. And the design of really successful interventions utilise behavioural insights to leverage biases and cultural nuances. And put up an example here of a tick and a cross. And can anyone see what might be a little bit off in that?
Red light means stop.
Yes.
Green go.
Green go. Yeah. So we've got to think about little nuances like that when we're doing our messaging to make sure things are really resonating with people. Another thing to keep in mind is sometimes there's a bit of a gap between what people think, the knowledge they have, and the behaviours they perform. And we describe this as the knowledge-behaviour gap. And this gap often exists because we are people, we are irrational just by our nature. We're really not programmable computers. We're special. So unlike a computer, just because I know something doesn't necessarily mean I will do something. So for example, for myself, I know that sugar is bad for my health. But I eat it, for example, because I don't know how to bake a cake without sugar. I don't have the capabilities to do that. I also know that composting my food scraps is better than putting it in landfill. That's something I know. But I don't have a garden to have a compost bin, so I lack an opportunity to do that. I also know that public transport is better for the environment than petrol cars. But it can sometimes be a bit inconvenient, and I can perceive it to be more expensive. If I try to get here today on public transport, that would be quite challenging for me. So what's something that some of you might know, but that you don't do? Can you think of any examples? Don't mean to put you on the spot if you haven't thought about it before.
I know that eating meat is bad for the environment, but I still do it.
Yeah, so you're motivated by its taste, yeah. Yeah?
I know that I don't want to use any more single-use plastics, but I keep wanting to buy shampoo, but it's bloody hard to find a place to go and refill, so I just keep doing it.
Yeah, so you're lacking an opportunity to do what you want to do. Yeah. Anyone else want to share one? Yeah?
I know, I don't get up early in the morning from bed, and I want to stay there.
Yeah. Differing motivational conflicts there. Awesome. So when we think about these different behaviours, we can think about the drivers, the barriers, and the touch points of ways that we can influence them. So drivers are the things that motivate a behaviour to occur, things that make you want to do that behaviour. And barriers on the flip side are the things that deter you from doing that behaviour. And the touch points are the places that interface with our audience that we want to perform that behaviour. And these drivers and barriers, thinking about the examples we just talked about, can be attitudes, values, thoughts and feelings, but they can also be psychological or physical barriers. You know, I lack the skills to bake without sugar, or I just don't have those sugar alternative products available within my budget. And touch points can be communication.